how to draw near to God, and that is, don't waste your pain. Don't waste your pain, because God's giving us trials and tribulations to refine us, to test us, to purify us. And if that's why it's so important to know the attributes of God. So when you know God's attributes, and you know his motives and his desires for you, which is to primarily be to be conformed into the image of his son. So it's not about your comfort, it's about being conformed into the image of Christ. Then your pain becomes a process where he chops away the flesh in us. That's so difficult that we struggle every day. But that's where I wanted to bring in the scriptures. David wrote, "Before I was afflicted, I went astray, but now I keep your word." And I find that in the NAR, or word of faith, or whatever, prosperity gospel, your natural inclination to trials and tribulations is to push, to resist, right? Because nobody likes suffering. Even Paul didn't like. He pleaded God 3 times, "Please remove this thorn in the flesh." And God answered his prayer, just not what he thought it would be. And he said, "My grace is sufficient for you." And so God, through the thorn in the flesh, was protecting Paul from pride, from being puffed up because of his revelations. And God does the same way. He works the same in our lives, in that he allows us to go through these sufferings and difficult times to protect us from something far worse that we don't really realize. And so if we don't understand the attributes of God, if we don't understand the promises of God, then we're going to really have a problem when suffering and hard times hit. And as you said, if you'd been through what you guys experienced as a family through the diagnosis, if you were in the NAR, you probably would have shipwrecked your faith. But when we have the word of God to stand on, and we know the truth, then these trials and tribulations, we understand the purpose, and we are able to endure them, and we don't see it as a failure. We see it as the Father allowing us to go through this the suffering, because it is for our good. All things work together for the good of those who love him, who are going to be conformed into his image. And just one of my notes, I wrote this: trials are not a sign that God has forsaken you or that he's removed his presence. They're a sign that you're a child of God. You're being tested, refined, and they're an opportunity to know God in a deeper way. So really the lesson is, don't waste your pain. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 1, verse 8 to 9, "For we do not want you to be unaware, brothers, of the affliction we experienced in Asia. For we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt we had received the sentence of death, but that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead." So that's such a good point about worship. And that's the beautiful thing, isn't it? When we come out of this horrible, despicable movement, we can worship God in the midst of trials, because the one thing that doesn't change is God and his word.
Yeah, I love that. And I was thinking too, I was reading this book recently called Consider the Lilies, and it was focusing on Jesus's Sermon on the Mount when he talked about dealing with worry and anxiety and fear. And one of the things that Ardavana says in this book is that we need to look at those moments of suffering and difficulty as opportunities to draw close to the Lord. And that was one of those moments of thinking, yeah, I hadn't really thought about it that way. I mean, it had inadvertently done that, but really looking at it in a different way of when those times come of difficulty, looking at it as an opportunity to draw close to the Lord, your fellowship, your intimacy with God, that you get the opportunity to draw close to the Lord in that moment, to glorify him, to ask him to sanctify you. And when you're talking about God's attributes, we're ultimately resting in the sovereignty of God. And nothing is happening in our lives that God's missed. It hasn't happened without passing through his hands first. And that should comfort us. It can be difficult because we don't understand, but that really is comforting when we continue. And I have to continue to go back to that.
Yeah.
I continue to go back to that. And and find peace in that of going, God, you knew this was whatever's going on. You knew this was going to happen. And I take comfort in that because I'm not dealing with God and the devil. This is God. The devil's not the antithesis of God. God is supreme. He's sovereign. He's omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient. He needs nothing from me.
Yeah.
He's self-sustaining. He's all sufficient. He doesn't need me. I need him. And when I rest in his sovereignty and in his attributes, then that gives me comfort even when I'm hurting, even when it's difficult. In Romans 8, when Paul is talking about that God works all things for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose, there's many times that we can think, well, God's going to work everything out for my good, and it's all going to be good. But we don't realize that the things that he's working out for the good of those who love him, for his glory and for our good, that includes suffering.
Yeah.
It includes suffering. We cannot escape that. And so look at those opportunities in your life as moments to draw close to the Lord. And what Rick said is that you don't waste your pain. I mean, utilize those opportunities and glorify God in the process, and ask him to help you. Ask him to strengthen you.
Right. I just want to take this opportunity to read, based on what you said, from Martin Lloyd-Jones's book. And he writes this: God is light, and any fellowship that I may have with him is in terms of that. It exposes the false. Not only that, it delivers me at once from attempting in a false way to try and find fellowship with him. If I start with this conception of his holiness, then I see at once that certain things I'm prone to do are ultimately going to fail. But it saves us also from another thing. It saves us from the terrible danger of tending to blame God and to criticize him in times of trouble and in times of need. And that is one of our greatest dangers, to misunderstand God, to argue and to question. Why does God do this? Did I deserve this? But if I start with the holiness of God, I will never speak like that. I know at once that whatever may be happening to me is not the result of anything unworthy in God. God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. So that whatever may be happening to me is not in any way due to any imperfections in God. It silences me. I put my hand upon my mouth and prevent myself from speaking foolishly and whiningly. And I think he's alluding to, obviously, Job, the book of Job. And this is what Job discovered.